All right, it's 4 o'clock here on the East Coast, here in Washington, D.C., outside Washington, D.C. And today we're going to do our webinar on mobile accessibility. Our presenter today will be Gian Wild from AccessibilityOz. But before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. We are monitoring the chat, so if you have any questions, you're looking for you're having any audio difficulties, or you just have a question about the technical aspects of the webinar, just go ahead and put them in the chat, and Priya will be monitoring that, and she can answer any of your questions. If you have questions on the content or questions for Gian at the end of the presentation, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A section, and I'll be reading off the questions as we get to the end of our webinar so that we can get that out to everyone. So happy to do that. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Gian, if you want to bump to the next slide, and I'll introduce Common Look. So today our webinar is going to be done by Gian from AccessibilityOz, and she will introduce her company here in a second, but just a little bit of information on Common Look, if you're not familiar with Common Look. We've been around for over 20 years. Our side of accessibility is focused on document accessibility. So we are purely built around making sure documents are accessible and compliant, standards compliant, and accessible to everyone. So we do it through very different means. We have software tools. We have an entire accessibility suite for making documents accessible. We do remediation work for documents up to millions of pages annually. We do training on how to create accessible documents. We work in all lines of business, and we're very much focused on that aspect of accessibility. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gian. And today we're going to talk about mobile accessibility.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks everyone for attending. A little bit about AccessibilityOz. We audit, we train, and we transform. We have three products: OzArt, our automated accessibility testing tool; OzWiki, our database of accessibility errors, screenshots, code, and solutions; and OzPlayer, our accessible video player. And everyone who attends a presentation of mine gets access to OzWiki, so we'll send them out towards the end of these series of webinars, which are our last one will be run by Common Look next week. So anything that with regards to accessibility, we do. Anyway, on to mobile. So let's talk about mobile accessibility fails. I'm not sure if any of you have seen any of my previous presentations, but I'll sort of talk about where I have come when it comes to mobile accessibility. But I wanted to start a little bit with some of the things that we see, I'm sure, all the time when it comes to mobile. So this is an example here of Jamie Oliver's recipes, and when you open the recipes app, you immediately get thrown into the video player on your mobile device, and Jamie plays a video. Of course, doesn't have captions, doesn't have audio descriptions, and so this fails WCAG 2 success criterion 2.2.2 pause, stop, hide. We also have color contrast issues. So this is Amazon, and the thing that most people go to Amazon for is to search, because, you know, there's not really navigation that's very valuable there. And the search here is all grey on a white background, doesn't meet color contrast requirements, fails WCAG 2 success criterion 1.4.3 contrast minimum. Now, I was sitting next to someone who worked at an organization like this, Amazon, eBay, Alibaba, one of those organizations, and I mentioned that, you know, the color contrast was problematic on their search, and they said, oh yes, you know, we fixed that, and our profits rose by 13%. So that's something that, you know, people would give their, you know, give anything for, to have profits increase by 13%. So color contrast really does make a difference. This here is Netflix. Now, before COVID, I did a lot of traveling. I mean, a lot of traveling. And there's something about Netflix that was just kind of I don't know, kind of supportive. Wherever I went, you know, I could watch sort of the same shows, although things are a little bit different between the American and US Netflix. But often I would get this error, which is called error, and there's no description. And this fails WCAG 2 success criterion 3.3.1 error identification and 3.3.3 error suggestion. This is an example of the ABC, which is the Australian Broadcasting Commission, and they have an in-app setting for text size. So on the left, you have smallest text size, which is about, say, 6 points, and on the right, you have largest text size, which is perhaps about 12 points. And so the normal text size is about 10 points. And so this really doesn't meet your 200% requirements under WCAG 2 or your 400% requirements under 2.1. This fails criterion 1.4.4 resize text. The interesting thing about this is what you see when you look at the articles themselves. But if you actually look when you first load the page, you see that whether your screen size is small or as large as possible, they look exactly the same. So basically those in-app settings aren't inherited by the article title or the caption or the author. Another example here is Asana, which we used before Trello came out. And in Asana, I would only operate from my tasks. So if it wasn't under my tasks, and that's basically all tasks that were assigned to me, then I wouldn't do it. And the problem is that the app Asana doesn't actually have a my tasks section. So I couldn't really use the app, and therefore we moved to Trello. So why did we develop this methodology, this mobile testing methodology? So in ICT, in 2017, the end of 2017, there was a conference, ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium. It runs every year. It's running again this year virtually. And basically we had this town hall kind of discussion where we talked about what was missing in the world, in the industry of accessibility. And one of it was, what do we do about mobile? WCAG 2.1 hadn't been released, and we really hoped that 2.1 would address the mobile requirements. But in the meantime, every different accessibility company out there was recommending different things, from testing only with assistive technologies to testing only just the sites to only testing the code if you could get to it. And so we wanted something that really was created by all accessibility companies and was an amalgamation of the accepted mobile accessibility standards. So we formed the ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium Mobile Subcommittee, and that ran for a year, and I was a co-chair, and we developed a document which talked about mobile site and native app testing requirements. And of course, then WCAG 2.1 was released in June 2018. So just a little to step back, WCAG 2 really doesn't apply very well to mobile. So for example, WCAG 2 success criteria like alt attributes to images do apply to mobile, very easily applied to mobile sites as well as native apps. However, WCAG 2 requires that everything be accessible to the keyboard user, but it doesn't specify that everything should also be accessible to the touch user. And we do see sometimes, surprisingly, where touch accessibility is a problem. So WCAG 2.1 absolutely does build on this and addresses more criteria related to touch screens such as pointer gestures, sensors and small screen devices. However, it still doesn't cover all the user needs related to mobile accessibility. And so what we find is things like the size, the pointer size of an actionable item is a AAA requirement, which is something that is actually really important. And mobile is really different to desktop because there are native screen readers such as TalkBack and Android, Narrator for Windows, VoiceOver for iOS, volume control, haptic keyboard, visual, auditory and vibrational notifications, text-to-speech and speech recognition, and Zoom, and there's a whole lot more. And it's very different in desktop. You might have access to 10 different screen readers. On your mobile device, you have access to maybe one, maybe two. And two is really, say, Voice Assistant on Samsung and TalkBack on that Samsung as well. So what happened is, after WCAG 2.1 was released, we decided that we really needed to keep going with these guidelines. So we split the committee into two. We had a mobile site subcommittee and a native app subcommittee, and I was co-chair on both subcommittees. And we developed basically a set of testing guidelines for the mobile site and for the native app. And you can find those on our website now. And we have a whole series of different documents that go through the various different requirements, which I'll take you through towards the end of this presentation. Just a little bit more about mobile. There's also system accessibility settings such as font size, touch and hold delay, screen rotation, high contrast, assistive touch, and mono audio. Now, WCAG 2.1 also talks specifically about page variations. So this is an example. Say low vision users who use the zoom function inherent in the browser are often restricted to a mobile view on their desktop, because basically the site determines how large the screen is, and if someone has increased zoom, then it becomes a smaller screen, and therefore they think that they're displaying on a mobile when in fact they're displaying on a desktop at a 200%. And so therefore there are a number of cases where people are stuck with a mobile version of a site on a desktop. And so that's one of the reasons why you need to test all variations of a page, but also importantly that all functionality is available on all page variations. So this is an example here with YouTube where firstly upload and notification buttons were visible at 100% screen size, but not at 200% screen size, because the theory is if you're on mobile, you wouldn't upload through the website, you'd use the YouTube app. And so that meant that people who were using desktop who had low vision and increased their text size weren't able to upload videos. So this is an example here at 100% for YouTube and on desktop, and here you can see upload and notifications are gone at 200% on desktop. So now they have fixed this, and it also works at 400%, which is great. But that's just one example where you really can't remove functionality just because you think you're going to have users on a mobile device. And you really need to make sure everything works on a desktop and everything works on a mobile. So even if you have an M.dot site, you need to test that on desktop. You need to be able to move between the desktop and the M.dot site, because people will choose one over the other. 2.1 also specifically talked about accessibility support, that basically implementation techniques that support assistive technology such as TalkBack, VoiceOver, etc. are used. Now this basically means when it comes to native apps, you absolutely have to test with the assistive technologies. With native apps, you don't have access to the code the way that you do with a website. And so really the only way to easily determine if, say, a image has an appropriate alternative text is with an assistive technology. So this methodology that we developed doesn't include those errors already included in WCAG 2, but it does include the new errors in 2.1, but those are very specifically referenced. So you know that we're saying, okay, this is in 2.1. We are looking in the next year, in the 2021 year, developing mobile guidelines that include all WCAG 2 as well. So you just have one set of guidelines. You don't have to test WCAG 2 and then our guidelines as well. So one of the things that I really want to emphasize is that you must test with real devices. There are a lot of places out there which will allow you to test using, testing suites in the middle of nowhere, but you absolutely have to test with real devices. And if you're testing in specific locations, then you must test in specific locations. So this is an example here where, 5 or 10 years ago when I was traveling well, it seems like 5 or 10 years ago, but it was just last year. But it's about 5 years ago, back when I was flying to LA, there was no Wi-Fi on the planes. And so it's a 15-hour flight from Melbourne to LA. And I don't know, I don't think I've ever gone 15 hours without accessing the internet. So by the time we land at LA, I'm kind of dying for internet access. And the problem is that usually when you fly from Melbourne to LA, there are a whole, a bunch of headwinds and things that affect landing time. So often when you land, you actually sit on the tarmac for an hour or two before a gate becomes available. So you can actually access the airport Wi-Fi when you're sitting on the tarmac. So we would land in LA and I'd try and connect to the Wi-Fi and I'd get this page. This page will redirect. So content doesn't really make sense to have here. And all of a sudden, because you get an hour's free Wi-Fi and then you have to pay for it, I don't really feel safe in giving you my credit card details. So this is the kind of thing that I mean about testing with real devices. This is something that people in their testing missed, probably because they were testing in a different location on a bank of devices that are actually sitting elsewhere. So we talk about testing methods in the testing methodology, and the testing methods are basically, there are 4 main testing methods in mobile testing. Testing with devices, so testing on mobile and tablet devices. Testing with devices with assistive technology, so testing on mobile and tablet devices with assistive technologies or mobile features, such as grayscale or increased text size or something like that. On mobile sites, there is also testing on a responsively sized window on desktop. You can actually get away with doing some testing that way. And you also need to test on desktop itself, just to compare and contrast what is available on the mobile and what is available on the desktop. With native app, there's really only 2 testing methods: testing with devices and testing with devices with assistive technologies. So let's talk about site types, because site types, when it comes to mobile sites, are really important in terms of what it is that you end up testing. There are basically 3 types of mobile sites. There's the desktop websites, which have only one display, whether you view it on desktop or a mobile or tablet device. Then there's an M.dot site that have a particular display for mobile and tablet sites. The M.dot site must be tested against the entirety of WCAG 2, in addition to the www version of the site. And then you have responsive websites that change depending on the screen size or other features determined by the developer. So here's an example of a desktop site. You've got the Australian National Botanic Gardens, you've got your left-hand navigation, your header, and a little bit of text in the middle. And this is what it looks like on a desktop. And on a mobile, responsively sized window, you can see that it's exactly the same, it's just cut off. So the content doesn't change at all as you drag the browser window narrower, it just cuts off certain information. You get a horizontal scroll bar at the bottom of the page. And those people that know 2.1 would know, of course, that that fails one of the new 2.1 requirements. In order to identify an M.dot site, you really need to do these 3 steps. You need to first ask the client if they've got an M.dot site, but you can't stop there. You need to also change the URL to start with M.dot instead of www. And then you need to open the M.dot and the www. On desktop and also on mobile and see what happens. Because we have had instances where the client has said, we don't have an M.dot site, and yet there is clearly an M.dot site when you type it in. We've also had clients say, no, there's no M.dot site. There's nothing changes when you put M.dot on the desktop, but as soon as you look at it on a mobile device, completely different site. So you must undertake those 3 tasks. This is an example desktop site and compared to its M.dot site. This is Sephora. This is the homepage. You've got your header, your navigation along the top, and you've kind of got a brown body content which has clear, glow, use, smooth, and that's the www site. Now the M dot site, if you just replace that www with M, is more blue. It just has skin superfoods. You have a hamburger menu up the top left. You have a search bar that goes across the entire side, the entire screen. So this is completely different to what we saw before. And if you see the desktop in a smaller screen window, this is www, and you decrease the width of the browser window, and you do the same with the M dot, you can see that they're very different websites. And you can also see that the M dot is kind of designed for that mobile window size. Now, in most cases, websites are going to be responsive. If the site is responsive, it's definitely not a desktop site. However, it is possible that there could also be an M dot site. We have found responsive websites with a secondary M dot site. So if the site is responsive, the layout changes as you change the browser window size. To test this, you open the website in the browser, ensure the window is not maximized, select the right-hand edge and drag it to the center of the screen. So this is an example here. We've got the AccessibilityOz website, you've got your navigation along the top, and then you've got your services, which is 6x1. When you make that screen smaller, the navigation changes into a hamburger menu, and the services are 2x3 instead of 6x1. And so now you need to talk about variations of a page. So variations of a page happen with responsive sites only. And it's important that every variation of the page is tested and all functionality is available on all variations of the page. That doesn't mean it needs to look exactly the same. You can hide content, etc., but you must be able to access all the content on each variation of the page. Why do people provide variations of the page? Often to highlight particular content, such as phone details, or hide particular content, such as image galleries, or hide functionality that doesn't work, such as a drag and drop feature. Now, highlighting particular content, that's absolutely fine. You can hide particular content as well, as long as there is still some way to access it, say through an expandable menu or a link or something like that. And hiding functionality that doesn't work on mobile, you need to provide equivalent functionality. So if there's a drag and drop feature, maybe you can include a form that does the same stuff. There are 4 different methods to trigger the variation of a page. There's device. The website can determine if you're using a specific device and serve a page depending on that. It can determine if you're using a specific operating system. It can determine if you're using a specific browser, but the most common is screen size, and that's, you can mimic that just on the desktop. However, so it is worth asking the client if there are different triggers for variation of a page, and just looking at these 4 options to make sure that the device, the operating system, and the browser are not used as triggers, and they shouldn't be used. If they are, then you need to talk to the developers and ask them to use the screen size only. So this here is variation in content included on the page. So you've got your navigation here on the AccessibilityOz website and desktop size, which is all just text along the top. And then when you make the window smaller, it's a hamburger menu. Now this is completely different code. So you actually will then need to test the navigation that goes along the header, but you also need to test that the hamburger menu has particular alternative text, meets color contrast, etc., etc. So that's variation in content, and that means that you actually have to test 2 lots of things. Whereas this is variation in presentation. This is the ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium. On your desktop size, you've got Home Committee Register Program horizontally along the page. And when you decrease the size of the window, Home Committee Register Program look exactly the same. They're just vertically down the page. Now that you only need to test once. So it's exactly the same code, it's just a change in display. So that's something that you should kind of keep an eye on when you're doing testing. Once again, each variation of a page needs to be tested if it contains either a variation in content or a variation in presentation, but sometimes you can get away with testing less. So that's for the mobile sites. Let's talk about native apps. The first thing you need to do with a native app is define application functionality. Through your understanding of the purpose of the native mobile application, define which functionality is critical to its purpose and use, and that must be tested for efficacy, operability, and workflow from a user experience perspective. So, for example, a banking app has a very specific function. It's to maintain your bank accounts, transfer money, access information about your bank accounts, etc. That's very different from a bank website, which has a much more amorphous functionality. So native apps have very specific functionality, and you should take that into account when you're testing. So basically, you should ask the question, how would the experience be impacted if the functionality failed, the content could not be reached, and or the experience caused a barrier to the user? And then you should prioritize. Absolutely, all functionality should be accessible within the native application. However, it's important to define and include critical functionality to prioritize testing. So let's talk about the methodology itself. The mobile site testing methodology has 5 steps. It's very similar. The only step that's different to the native app methodology is step 2. So step 1 is identify devices. Step 2 is identify site type and variations. Step 3 is test critical issues. Step 4 is test mobile specific issues. And step 5 is test mobile assistive technology and feature support. The native app methodology, very similar. Step 1, identify devices. Step 2, define application functionality. Step 3, test critical issues. Step 4, test mobile specific issues. And step 5, test mobile assistive technology and feature support. So let's go through these steps in detail. Firstly, identify devices. Now, we recommend the device combinations for mobile sites as iPhone Safari, iPad Safari, and Android phone Chrome. Now, for native apps, we recommend iPhone, iPad, Android phone, and do consider an Android tablet. The best way to determine what devices you should be testing on is to look at your Google stats. So other devices, as I said, Android tablet, and things like Kindle. If you're testing an EPUB or something like that, that's going to use a specific device, then make sure you test on that device. You should test on the latest version of iOS and test on the latest 2 versions of Android. And where a site is directly aimed at a person with a particular kind of disability, consider including those assistive devices and assistive technologies that are used by potential users. So if it's a site about Switch users, then make sure you have some Switch user testing done. And just in case you had forgotten, you need to meet WCAG 2 and this mobile testing methodology. So for mobile sites, you need to identify the site type and the variations of the page. So you need to determine if the site is desktop, responsive, or MDOT. If the site is responsive, you need to identify each variation of the page. For native apps, you need to define application functionality. Now, as well as defining what the critical functionality is on your native app, you need to also test these things. Navigation, landing screens, emergency sections, login flows, settings, account and profile, contact us, real-time updates, you know, Uber, etc., privacy policy terms and conditions, interactional functionality, help section, widgets such as calendars, geolocational maps, and high traffic areas. And then let's talk about the critical issues. So one of the things that we found is that there were a lot more traps when it came to mobile than we see on websites, probably because it's a fairly new technology in comparison to HTML. Now, a trap is where a user is trapped within a component and cannot escape without closing the browser or the app. So think about a keyboard trap on desktop where you say tab into a video player and you can't tab out. And as I said, there are many more traps in mobile sites and native apps than on a desktop. The first one we identified was the exit trap, with the requirement is ensure there is always an accessible actionable item, e.g. a close button that meets color contrast requirements and has an accessible name that closes any feature that overlays the current page, such as a full page ad. This applies to all users and it applies to both the mobile site and the native app methodology. This here is an example of an ad that can't be closed. So this is, you're at Facebook and you go to a page, a URL, and it pops up this ad for the HP Elite Book Folio, and there's actually no close button. So you basically are trapped in that, and the only way to escape it is to close Facebook and start again. Another example, which I'm sure we've all seen, is the close button that doesn't meet color contrast requirements on a pop-up ad, or is so small that you can't actually activate it. And so this here is a for sale for the San Francisco Chronicle, and the little close button is only a handful of pixels across, and the little close icon doesn't meet color contrast requirements. The next trap is the swipe scroll trap. Ensure you do not override standard mobile touch functions, such as swiping, scrolling, etc., on the majority of the page. Now, this applies to touch users, and the methodology is both the mobile site and native app. So this here is an example of a swipe scroll trap where you are at the bottom of this page and you actually can't swipe up the page. The only thing that works is activating this little arrow in the bottom right hand corner that, excuse me, will take you to the top of the page. This is an example also of a swipe scroll trap, which I've used, I think, in every single mobile presentation I've ever done. I call it the Zoom of Doom. You have a map here that takes up almost the entirety of the page. So if you swipe anywhere on the map, then you actually move the map. You don't move the page. You have to hit those small areas of white to actually scroll the page. Then we have a text-to-speech trap. If the app has an ability to provide content via text-to-speech, the screen reader user must be able to pause or stop the app speaking in a simple manner, e.g. by performing a swipe on screen. Now, this applies to screen reader users only, and the methodology is only native app. So here we've got Pocket, where basically you can play an article, and once you've activated that, the screen reader users can't actually stop the text-to-speech. If they try and pause the text-to-speech, it actually pauses their screen reader, not the text-to-speech. And we have a headset trap. Headset users must always be able to pause media, audio or video content by using the pause play control on the headset. And this applies to screen reader users and headset users, and the methodology is only native app. So this here is, you've got a video at the bottom of the screen, and if you want to turn audio off, you need to tap that little mute icon, but if you press pause on your headset, it will pause the screen reader. It won't pause the actual audio of the video. And we have a layer trap. The user should not be trapped on a non-visible layer. It applies to all users, but it's mostly encountered by screen reader users. And the methodology is the mobile site and native app. So this is an example here where you've got a website, you open the the hamburger menu, and the screen reader user is trapped underneath the hamburger menu on the homepage. And you can't see the homepage because it's overtaken by the hamburger menu. Next, we test mobile-specific issues, and these are all broken into different groups. The first one is alternatives. So just some examples of the requirements. All of them are on the website. Alternatives are provided for non-web functionality that is mandatory. For example, recording a specific gesture by the camera before functionality appears. So this is an example. We had quite an argument actually in the committee about whether this was a pass or a fail, because basically it says copy this gesture to prove that you're really a person. And of course, if you're a screen reader user, you have no idea what that gesture is. At the bottom, it has an option that says need another way. And if you activate that, you get an email, doesn't meet color contrast requirements, that says verification query, type your message. So my argument was that wasn't sufficient, therefore it fails this requirement. And other people were like, well, it does have an alternative, but the alternative has some accessibility issues. So, but that's the kind of thing that we mean. Alternatives are provided for geolocation functionality that is mandatory, for example, requiring a specific geolocation before functionality appears. Unless the geolocation is essential for legal reasons or doing so would invalidate the activity. This applies to geolocation via GPS, user statement, IP address, or other methods. So this is an example of IKEA. When you go to the website, it says we need access to your location. And if you say block, it gives you this dialog box that says info, location service is not enabled for this app. Please go to settings and enable it, limited functionality of app, dismiss. So it doesn't even tell you what the limited functionality is, but at least you can dismiss it and then use the site. Sometimes you can't even do that. This is a pass. So this is Lyft here, and you can see that you're actually located in Northeast Portland, where the blue dot in the top middle, but you've actually specified a pickup address that is not your current location. And that is a pass, where you can choose a different location to where you're geolocated. Changes of state of non-standard controls, e.g. hamburger menu star ratings, are clearly indicated. So this is a pass example. You've got here the United app. You've got your hamburger menu in the top left-hand corner, and when it's closed, it's just 3 bars. And when it's open, those 3 bars turn into an arrow that indicates that's what you tap to close the hamburger menu. Next section is display. This is something where it's actually a 2.1 requirement. So whenever we specify a 2.1 requirement, we reference it in the methodology. So this is size of touch targets is at least 44 by 44 CSS pixels, which is approximately 7 to 10 millimeters. For more information, see WCAG 2.1, success criterion 2.5.5 target size. Please note that this differs from WCAG 2.1 as success criterion 2.5.5 is a level AAA requirement, but in this methodology, it is a mandatory requirement. And just so you know, everything in the methodology is mandatory. We don't have a AA or AAA. We just have, this is what you need to do. This here is an example of failing touch target size. So you have gone to the Airbnb website, and at the top it pops up and it says, hey, would you like to install Airbnb? And the only way to close it is to hit the very small close button in the top left-hand side. Now this also fails your kind of exit trap as well, except that it doesn't take up, you know, the entire screen. So, but you do have a very small area to tap there, and that would fail this requirement. This is a pass of touch target size. This is an Outlook message. And so you've got the to, the CC, BCC, subject, and then your keyboard, and each one has adequate touch target size. Actionable items have sufficient inactive space between them. Inactive space of at least 10 pixels should be provided around active elements. So this here is an example, once again, of Asana that has this problem. In the top right-hand corner, let me see, no, I have not circled it. There is an edit button, and then immediately underneath that, maybe 2 or 3 pixels below, is a mark complete button. And so it's very easy to accidentally activate the mark complete button when you actually want to edit it. And this is really problematic because these are basically opposite options. Now, the other problem is that there's no way to undo this on the mobile app, which fails a WCAG 2 requirement. So let's talk about actionable items. Native UI controls, objects, alerts, and elements have been used. So this is an example where a non-standard UI element has been used. They've used an input text box in your field, and excuse me, they also have added some kind of JavaScript to it, so it pops down the 14, 15, 16, 17. Now, it won't accept any keyboard input, so you have to select via touch the 14, 15, 16, 17, and of course, there are no other ways to choose any other years. When direct input via the keyboard is not required, provide options for the user to achieve the same result, i.e. use drop-down radio buttons and text boxes, checkboxes. So this is keyboard dependent here. You've got here the United States. It's an address series of fields for prime. You specify the country, region, United States, but you have to actually type in the state and the zip code. Now, there are only 50 states in the US. Correct me if I'm wrong. In Australia, there's 6, 7, 8, depending on you choosing if you count the territories. And so it would be much better for those to be drop downs than to be things that you actually type in, because typing means that you're more likely to make a mistake, the form won't be accepted, or it will be accepted and people won't be able to go to the right place. So having drop downs instead of expecting people to type is sometimes problematic. This is an example where you've passed it, you've written 2001M, and you've got a drop down here of all the different options. 2001 Market Street, San Francisco, California, 2001 Mission Street, San Francisco, California, etc. So that's a way that you would pass this requirement. Functionality that can be operated by device motion or user motion can also be operated by user interface components, and responding to the motion can be disabled to prevent accidental actuation, except for certain situations. And this, for more information, see WCAG 2.1 Success Criterion 2.5.4 Motion Actuation. So this is an example on an iPhone. If you're in something that allows typing and you shake it, you get a pop-up that says undo typing, undo and cancel. Now it can be turned off in settings, but there's no alternative, so that fails. Compared to if you're in Facebook and you shake, it says report a problem. Your feedback helps us improve Facebook. And you can have a thing there that you can report a problem on Facebook in another way, but it can't be turned off. You can turn it off if you shake it and then turn it off at that point. But if you can't ever shake the phone, then you can't turn it off. Infinite scrolling, we've outlawed infinite scrolling. Infinite scrolling has some major issues in that people who use screen readers, they get kind of an overview of the page by pulling out the list of links or the list of headings. And if you use infinite scrolling, they're not going to get the entire content of the page. And it causes problems for people with cognitive disabilities, loading problems for people who have internet access issues, etc. So infinite scrolling is something that we outlaw. The next section is navigational aids. Visual indicators such as arrows, next and previous buttons have been used to indicate swipe or scroll areas or additional functionality. For more information, see WCAG 2.1 Success Criterion 2.5.1 Pointer Gestures. So here is the BBC News, I believe, and you have tabs at the top stories, my news, popular. If you swipe from right to left, you actually move to the next tab. The entire page moves. However, there's no indicator that a horizontal swipe will actually do that. Navigational aids such as back buttons, breadcrumbs, next and previous buttons are provided. So this is an example here where you've got the iTunes app and on Android, and in order to, this is a pop-up over the actual iTunes app that shows you the song that's playing. For those that can't see it, it's Bad Moon Rising by Creedence Clearwater Revival. The way that you close this page is you swipe from the top to the bottom. And this doesn't actually, it's not indicated in any way, whereas it is indicated in the iPhone. Then we have audio and video. We require that all audio and video have an accessible transcript. So if you've been listening to any of my presentations, you know that I dislocated my toes about 18 months ago. So I have these excellent exercises that I need to do. And this app here has a video of exactly what you need to do, and underneath it has it in text. So it says, sit in a chair with your feet on the floor, take a deep breath in and lift your toes up, hold this position, then relax. So that is a valid transcript. So all audio and video requires a transcript under this methodology. And then we have forms. Field labels are positioned adjacent to their input field and appear closest to their respective input field in relation to other field labels and other input fields. So this here is an example where positioning is incorrect. You've got two radio buttons, yes and no, and the yes radio button is actually closer to the no field label than the yes field label. And yes, you can see that there is a no radio button to the right of the no field label, but it doesn't meet color contrast requirements, so it's very easy for that to be missed. And lastly, we talk about mobile desktop interaction, and of course this is only relevant for mobile sites. Item labeling between different types of a site, desktop, and/or responsive, and different variations of a responsive site is consistent. And so this is the Asana example that we talked about before, where you've got My Tasks on the desktop, but you don't have it on the native app. And lastly, we have test mobile assisted technology and features support. And our methodology, it specifies for all the test cases that we've gone through, step-by-step instructions on how to actually test those requirements. But also for the mobile assisted technology and features support, it has a lot of instructions on how to use the assistive technologies and the step-by-step instructions to use them to test specific requirements as well. There's basically two requirements, which is all actionable items can be accessed and activated by the following assistive technologies or when the following feature is enabled, and all important content can be accessed by the following assistive technologies or when the following feature is enabled. And these are the features that we recommend that you test. For iOS, it's VoiceOver, keyboard and switch, zoom, invert colors, grayscale, and reader view. Reader view being a mobile site thing only. On Android, you've got talkback, keyboard and switch, magnification, invert colors, grayscale, increased text size, and in simplified view. And increased text size and simplified view are mobile site only. I'm just going to briefly show you where you can find these guidelines. So if you go to the AccessibilityOz website, and then under resources, there is mobile testing option here. And they're all Word documents. We will move them into a website at some point, but they're all Word documents here. So here you've got just the methodology, so just the test cases. Then you've got about mobile site testing. So talks about devices in more detail, assistive technologies, site types, variations of a page, and how to capture errors. Then we've got the critical test cases, and they all have pass examples, and then the actual mobile test cases, which also have pass examples and step-by-step instructions, and then you've got the assistive technology and mobile features. So we've got the same for the native apps as well. So yeah, I would be really interested to know how you find this and if you find it useful, and we will be starting the committee again probably later this year, early 2021, and we'd love to have your feedback. So please do get in contact if you come across something that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever, or you have questions about things, or if you'd like to join the committee. And even if you're not an accessibility specialist, but you're a mobile specialist, we'd love to hear from you as well, because there are some things that we don't know about mobile. So thank you very much, and let's talk about Q&A.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gian, for that presentation. We got about five or six questions so far, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first one was, why are mobile apps required to obey the mobile system font size settings?
That's a good question. So basically, there will be people that basically can't read in a standard text size, and so what they'll do is they'll change their app settings or their font size settings in their mobile devices, and it's important that basically the native apps inherit that information, so that they only need to change it once, because often where you have changed text features and things like that in a particular native app, they might not actually meet other color contrast requirements. However, I do believe, I'll need to check, but I believe that the methodology does say that if you don't support the system settings, that if you have an in-app font size change setting, then that would be sufficient. So I'll have to get back to you on that, because I know we definitely talked about that previously. I'm not sure if it's in the current methodology or not, but it is definitely preferable that a native app inherits the system settings.
Very good. The next question is, what is the main difference between an M.dot site and a responsive design site?
So an M.dot site, you'll see, won't change when you decrease the size of the site. Sometimes the M.dot sites are responsive as well, but I mean, it can get really complicated. But basically, the big difference is that a responsive site is just one URL. It's www. whatever it is. Whereas the M.dot site, you have one site that's www. and then you've got a different site that's M.dot. Now, that's the document here. Let me just get to it. This here, the About Mobile Site Testing, talks a lot about the different types of sites and the variations of a page. So have a read of that, and it also tells you how you determine the difference between them. And if it's still confusing, let us know, because we obviously need to do some work in making it more clear.
The next question is, what's a switch user?
A switch user is someone who uses, say, a joystick or something like that, instead of a keyboard or a mouse. A switch user, so they can also have just two buttons, and they often use an on-screen keyboard in addition to their switches. So the switches actually control the on-screen keyboard. There's a great YouTube video called One Thumb to Rule Them All. So one thumb as in finger, to rule them all as in it's kind of a play on one ring to rule them all, which is absolutely fantastic. And the user there is using a switch. So have a look at that, and that will definitely give you an idea.
Excellent. So then the next question is, are there any good courses or references you could recommend for inclusive design, accessible native mobile apps?
I'm doing a 3-hour course on this in more detail for the ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium when it happens later this year. I have been doing this course before COVID. I was doing this course in various different locations in the US, but there's nothing that I suppose I mean, even though there are a number of people on the committee from different accessibility testing companies, I don't believe any other company is actually going through this methodology or has something along those lines. If it's something that you are interested in, I would recommend reaching out to us through our inquiries email or just through our website and say, hey, I'd be interested in this training, because we have actually done training on this mobile testing for specific clients. We haven't got a public training organised, but if you've got enough people for a particular, for one group, we could definitely do that for you.
Very good. So the next question is, are there any automated testing tools that could be used to test native mobile apps?
No, there's, we talked a lot about this in the committee. There are some things like Google Lighthouse and stuff like that, and that you can, and I believe DQ has a native app that can kind of test your native apps, but they do so little that they're not really all that valuable. So it's something that we, as a company, we have an automated accessibility testing tool. We are working on building the native app and the mobile site testing. We can test mobile sites just fine, but native apps are a little bit different. So there, I believe Level Access has a testing tool that tests native apps as well, but I can't comment on how valuable that is. So I would say, really, we did talk a lot about this with the committee, and we decided that we weren't happy with what was available, especially because you really can't get to the code of a native app, and that therefore this methodology was going to be manual testing only.
Very good. So the next question is it possible for a mobile website to read the system font size set in the settings app?
No, so, okay, this is different for iOS 13, I believe. In iOS 13, I think it does, but in previous iOSs, you basically have to change the text size in the browser itself. And there's different ways of doing that if you're talking about an Android or if you're talking about an iPhone. And the document, this document here, test cases for assistive technologies and mobile features, that there tells you how to actually do that.
Very good. Here's a question about how about testing mobile apps with the use of Bluetooth keyboards on mobile devices?
Yeah, absolutely. So you do need to test your apps and your sites with a keyboard. And this document here, the mobile site assisted texting methodology document, this document and the native app version of that document as well talks about how you go about doing that.
Very good. So there's a couple questions on the committee you referenced earlier. So what committee are you referencing? Is it WCAG, IAAP, or an AccessibilityOz committee?
An AccessibilityOz committee. I don't know if you could really call that a committee. No, it's a committee made up of people who are interested in mobile, and it was basically, the idea was formed at the ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium, and we had people on the committee from the Paciello Group, Level Access, Site Improve, etc. So we had people representing, you know, the major accessibility companies.
So what about testing whether reduced motion accessibility setting is honored by the apps?
Yep, that's included in both this mobile site accessibility testing and native app accessibility testing methodology. We have yet, I believe we have yet to find a pass example for that. We do have a fail example, but I'm not sure it's in the documents. We took the fails out because we thought that it wouldn't really be fair to, you know, show a whole bunch of fails for, you know, different organizations without us contacting them and telling them that they, you know, should look at something. But yeah, we have found that that one was really difficult to find an example where it actually was done correctly. I think there is one in the native app one, and the native app test case for assistive technologies. So yeah, reduced motion is in there.
Okay. There's two more questions. So what's the main difference between testing mobile websites and native mobile applications?
So basically, with native apps, you only have one version, really. And with mobile sites, you can often have different versions due to the responsiveness of a site. The other major difference in the mobile sites is that you can access the HTML, access the code, whereas you can't do that in native app, which makes native app testing much, much harder. And the other big difference is that native apps are much more, I suppose, streamlined. They are aimed to do, or they're created to do a specific or a specific set of tasks, whereas mobile sites are often much more amorphous, and you'd have multiple different users trying to do multiple different things, whereas the native apps, the kind of user or the user journeys often are quite set.
Okay. And two more questions. Is there a more specific name for your mobile site accessibility testing methodology, such as the ICT mobile site accessibility testing methodology? It's a long term.
I think the full name is the ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium Mobile Site Testing Methodology. And then the ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium Native App Testing Methodology. But if you have any ideas, happy to hear from them, hear about them.
Yeah, we need an acronym, I think.
Yeah, I think you might be right. The NATM.
And the last question is, have you considered creating a before and after mobile example similar to the W3C's desktop bad sample that would let you exemplify failure cases?
Yeah, we have thought about it. We've got hundreds, and I mean probably even over 1,000 examples in these documents. So we did talk about kind of recreating them so that we could say, here's a before and here's an after, but that's just a huge amount of work, and we wanted to get the methodology right, and then sort of work on turning it into a website or doing that kind of thing. So at the moment, these test cases and all the examples are passes, but the fails are actually in OzWiki. So if you're interested in fails, then make sure you get access to OzWiki and you can have a look at those things, and they're pretty easy to find. So yes, it is something, and if you'd like to volunteer to do something like that, then we'd be very happy to have you.
And one very last question just came in, and then we'll wrap everything up in the interest of time for everyone. Are there any plans to include voice to text?
So voice to text was in iOS 13, and we said because iOS 13 came out like a month before we released, or we finished work on the methodology, that iOS 13 wasn't actually included in this methodology. So that's what we're planning to do next year as well.
Very good. Well, thank you everyone for a great webinar today. Stay safe, and we look forward to bringing you another webinar next week. And take care.
Thank you very much.